morning.
Good morning. Okay. I don't know. It's okay. Our first question for you is, do you find that on-campus or off-campus protests have been more effective in the past?
Before we get started, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let's have an introduction, okay?
Mhm.
So I can know you all with names and faces.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Kalia.
I'm Julie. I'm Kalia. I'm Gwen.
Who?
Kalia.
Kalea and Kalia.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And
Gwen.
Gwen. Okay. All right. Pleased to meet all of you.
You too.
Okay.
You too.
All right.
In the past, did you find that on-campus protests were more effective or on-campus protests?
In the past, in my past, we're directly talking about uh, where we did the basketball boycott, which I talked about intensively last week. Uh, those protests on campus reflected what was going on throughout the nation. Across the country, there were great protests against the Vietnam War. The Black Revolution was in full force. It was the beginnings of the Black Panther Party, which originated in Oakland, and there was a Black Power uh, thrust amongst blacks across the nation, protesting against the uh, being not included in what we would call human rights in this country. There was a termination of the Jim Crow laws in the South and in other states, including in California with the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1965. But still, racial injustices continued, where people were still not being included, and there were organized efforts to keep people from being included. So the protests on college campuses and all throughout the cities, and then there were the inner city riots that took place. I know in Detroit in 1967, if I remember that year right, in Los Angeles and Watts. So even I believe it was 1968 in the Mexico City Olympics that two medal winners, uh, when they received their medals, they gave the Black Power salute, so that the struggle would be something that was well known throughout the world. So the protests off the campus is what generated the protests on the campus. We were a microcosm of society at large.
Okay. Did you ever feel discouraged whenever things didn't progress the way that you wanted? Or?
No, we never had at that time any feeling of discouragement. We had a feeling at that time of being revolutionaries, and we knew we were on a battlefield of fighting for our rights and justices. So we knew it was an uphill battle, but in our spirits, we knew we were carrying on the torch that was handed down to us or handed on to us because as being blacks and Latinos, and that was our congregation on the campus, and there were other ethnic groups also, for Filipinos and Indonesians and um, uh, brothers and a couple of sisters from Africa themselves here on the campus, and we all united together and bonded in a unified stand to make sure that we had the conditions that we expected to be in place on the campus. and the right to have ethnic studies included in the curriculum. So we knew it was a battle, and we were all prepared to take that battle to the administrative level to make sure that our needs were addressed. So we never were discouraged.
And why do you feel that ethnic studies is important?
Repeat that again.
Why do you feel ethnic studies is important?
Ethnic studies is, and this of course is my personal interpretation of what that means and what it meant to me, is that in the country, United States of America, its history has to be taken into consideration. It's a history of exclusion, and we even know that uh, in the so-called founding fathers, stating that all men are created equal. But that wasn't a practice because all men were not treated equally. Now, the great revolutionary Malcolm X, in one of his speeches, I quote him as saying that in the development of this country or the founding of this country, the black man was put on the plantation and the red man was put on the reservation. That's how they built this nation. And that's exclusion and domination of, of races in order to establish the so-called more perfect union. But historically, we know it was exclusion of the blacks, the Latinos, the Native Americans, and the Asians. Of course, on the backs of the institution of slavery, there was a lot of profiteering, massive, on Southern aristocracy that was created by having people work without having to pay them. So you had a free labor force, so that increases your capital. And taking the land, from Native Americans and expanding west and just putting them out of their indigenous environment. And then, of course, the railroads were built by the Chinese labor, and they were excluded from being involved in their civil rights and human rights. So this country has its history embedded in, as I would say, non-inclusion. So if you are a person that lives in this country and you belong to an ethnic diverse group, then you will know that your history was one of not being included. So ethnic studies provide students of those diverse and I would say non-white backgrounds the opportunities to learn about themselves. So if you are given a narrative from the exploiters' passage of their interpretation of history, they will give it to you, and it has been given to you, and I am a result of receiving that type of history growing up as a kid in the 50s, where blacks, Native Americans, Latinos were not included in history textbooks on their achievements, what they contributed to the building of this nation. No mention of the horrors of slavery, very few mentioning of Native American achievements. Growing up as a kid in the 50s and early 60s, we knew of Native Americans on television shows which were highly popular in the 50s portraying Westerns, the Western movement of, they call themselves settlers, but I always looked at the westward movement of whites taking Indian territory or Native American territory as the invaders. That's how I looked at it, but not as a kid, because I didn't know the difference. But all we saw on the media and movies, television and radio programs is that as the so-called settlers were moving west from the East Coast, they were always meeting a resistance of Native Americans, who were always called savages and heathens. But there never was any explanation of why there was a resistance of Native Americans who were fighting the settlers that in the TV programs and the movies who were always being defeated by the U.S. cavalry. We just saw them as, why are they doing this? They're attacking white folks. And our brainwashed cells were in favor of the white expansion and looking at Native Americans also as being savages until we were given the history of what was going on and found that out. So if you're a person living in this country and you don't know your history and your contributions to this country, you will be a person that is misled in how you direct your day-to-day existence on where do you fit in. What does that do to your ego? How does that give you self-esteem to make a position that I do belong here? And if you run into any legal or illegal exclusion, then you have an opportunity to be able to fight that and challenge that by legal means. But if you don't know what your position is and your contributions, you will become a person that accepts the conditions of being excluded, the just keeping you out of being able to be a part of the inclusion. And the word I was looking for was being segregated and not segregated against and not to be able to enhance the fruits of what the country has to offer. So with ethnic courses, you get a chance, depending on what the course specific directive is, to see yourself as a part of what you contributed. Now, I'm speaking personally. For me, the ethnic courses that I studied here on the campus gave me knowledge of historic peoples from ethnic backgrounds, which made me feel proud. Say, okay, I am a part of peoples who have done something and should be honored. That is inspiration for you to feel good about yourself. And it also gives you just a whole psychology and a mindset that you can walk amongst everybody knowing that you have a right and you have a place and you have a history. Because as it is said, if you know your history, where you're from, then you can figure out what your present is. You can make it have meaning. And with that, you can take your present existence and move forward to create your future.
And going back to the on-campus protests, do you remember anything specifically about how you guys organized or about the protests themselves?
Okay, now that is going to be where it's going to extend beyond our conversation because Mushir and I have been sending Michael some literature on that, what the demands were and how they were responded to. And also some photos that he's going to share with you, I'm sure, of the protest that was out in front of the chapel. And I'm going to read a little bit of what was written in one of the St. Mary's newsletters, I think about 2 years ago, for the sake of our interview session here. But once you get to class, I'm sure Michael will be able to share with you all the specifics of the demands from that that chapel protest and the occupation. But now I remember, and again, this is personal recollection. And this is 52 years ago, give or take. After the basketball boycott, and I was the person who read the speech at the walkout in Santa Clara. And in last week's interview, I ran that down in great depth. But 2 days after that, the FBI came up, two FBI agents came up to the school and visited me and came to see me. And I was in my dorm room along with Mushir. We were just chilling out, doing our thing. And the agents came in and they warned me that I was on a list of dangerous people in the country, and told me that if I participated in anything like that again, I would be arrested. But again, all of that is in last week's interview. And I make mention of that because during the chapel protest, I was very hesitant of being a presence in that because of the warnings that the FBI gave me directly. But what I remember of it is that the Chicano students had one of their ethnic courses that was based on giving plays. They called it teatro. And from what I understood, learning the culture, the Chicano culture of being with those friends of mine who were from, the majority of them were from Los Angeles. And as I say, the black students and the Chicano students, the Latinos, we were as one. We had bonded as one. And they had a reality going on where one of the deans at that time was going to cut two of the courses. I don't remember the names of those classes. And they were addressing that, and they created a play, and it was given in Dryden Hall. And Mushir and I, of course, went to support, and we attended that play. And after that, addressing that these instructors were going to be removed, the Chicano students, from what I understand, they made the decisions that they were going to take it to another level, and they occupied the chapel. And this is where well, we could say the occupation took place. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and pull up some excerpts on that because it'll be almost direct to answering that question in amount of time that we have. Now, Mike has this as it was forwarded to him by Mushir, but as we're here, I'll read just a few passages of it to go right to the questioning, okay? Okay, now there was a student whose name was Thomas Ramirez, and he graduated in '74. And the students along with him who had entered the chapel on that Sunday morning, Thomas Ramirez made a statement to the people who were in the chapel at that time, and announcing that there would be a peaceful occupation in the chapel by the Chicano Student Organization, which was Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, which is the acronym for MACHA, and the Black Student Union, which is the BSU. And they were protesting a lack of institutional support for Chicano and black students, Ramirez told those that were present. And they intended to remain there for as long as necessary, vowing to go on a water-only fast until the administration addressed the concerns. Okay. Uh, a few days later, the BSU and Metro led a joint press conference calling out the lack of diversity on campus and emphasizing the need to implement special programs designed to meet the cultural, personal, and academic needs of black and Chicano students. Many of those same Metro and BSU students did occupy the chapel the following week. Okay? Now, again, I can't remember how long the students were in the chapel, as I was not a person that attended in the chapel occupation because of what I mentioned about the threat on me and the rallies that were held out in front of the chapel when the press came up to have the students make it known to the public at large through the media. I did not show up at those for those same particular reasons. But again, with the chapel fast occupation, the demands were written up on what that the BSU and Major wanted for the ethnic groups on the campus. And they were delivered to the president, who was Mel Anderson at the time. And Michael also has in his possession now from Lucia, from the book that Brother Mel Anderson wrote about those times, and I know he will share that with you, what those specific demands were and how Brother Mel agreed to the majority of those demands, and the ethnic courses blossomed from that. Okay, so prior to that, uh, uh, it wasn't as a more, I would say, a direct pipeline from student voices to the administration. But because of the chapel and the president acknowledging that presence in the chapel was something that was serious and strongly necessary for changes to be made on the campus. So it was a very powerful part that followed up after the boycott, which sent a message across the country and in specifically the Bay Area of what was going on at St. Mary's.
Yeah, so you would say that the not decline, but the not taking seriously the ethnic courses and not enough support from administration escalated to the hunger strike and the occupation.
Let me just weave into answering that on our not having courses that reflected us. And when I say our and us, speaking of the black students, the Latino students, Chicanos, and the other non-white students who were all participating with us together. Okay, so you can imagine, if you can, coming to St. Mary's for your degree. And at that time, prior to that, St. Mary's was dominantly an all-white male college. There were no women on this campus until my sophomore year, which was the year 71, 72. That was the first year that women were able to pursue degrees at St. Mary's. So in St. Mary's heydays, from its beginnings, it was a majority white male campus. And the curriculum reflected the values of a white male society. And of course, the degrees that you could pursue had its own interpretation of history and its significance. So you have all white male professors and delivering the message, and keeping in mind this is a Christian school that professed the Lasallian doctrine. So coming on campus, being of a non-white background for people, you were subject to being involved in this type of curriculum. Everybody takes on their own pursuit of knowledge in their own way. The number of black students and Latinos, from what I understand from my history of it, was very limited, very, very small until 1968 and 69. That's when I came and my brother started coming up to St. Mary's. And St. Mary's was reaching out to recruit uh, non-white ethnic students to come to the campus and study. And the dean of men at the time, uh, my freshman year, my brother's freshman year ahead of that was Odell Johnson. And Odell Johnson was the person who was fired. And that's what the walkout, the boycott was all about, was the illegal firing of Odell Johnson. But he was a strong recruiter of getting ethnic students to come to the campus. So we found ourselves growing in numbers. But then again, here you are at St. Mary's College, and there's nothing reflecting you. And you know you are on the campus, you're here, but you're really not a part of the campus because there's nothing that's saying that we respect your culture. There's nothing that's saying we recognize your culture. There's nothing saying we want to include your culture into the major culture of St. Mary's. So the early beginnings of ethnic classes being introduced was very slow. And in my first interview, I mentioned that on how there was a liaison between one of the Brother Mill's assistants, who was a black guy. He was very young, and he would talk with us as the students about what our needs were, and we expressed it to him that we would like to see diverse and ethnic courses. And I'm trying to remember back, because that's 50, going on 54 years ago, but I know we had two courses that we got started with, and I mentioned all of that in the first interview. But after the boycott and after the chapel protest and occupation, it expanded. It just grew out of that. And Brother Mill agreed to hire black professors to maintain the black study courses, the Latino courses that were in existence, and to continue to recruit for ethnic diversity and classes. And that's all in his book that Michael has a copy of that also. So, and for the sake of time and in the interview, all of that direct realities, Michael has that, and I know he will share it with you all.
Was there a lot of coordination between the student activists and the athletes?
The athlete perspective of it, the athletes, we basically, at that time, and this was all in my last week interview, were a wing, a more greater organized group, which is known as the Odell Johnson Defense Committee. The majority of those students were white students, and in their protest of Odell, because he was loved by everybody. And again, my interview 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, but it was last week, that led up to the boycott. The athletes were asked to demonstrate publicly a protest against Odell Johnson's firing, that it would be known to the public at large. So we were in coordination with that student group. And as athletes, we made our position, and the 5 of us that boycotted the game, and initially it was going to be the whole team, but the other players on the team, when it came down to get down, they didn't go through with it. But the five of us who are recognized remembered we did and carried it out. After that boycott, some of the players uh, participated in visiting the chapel with other black students, and uh, how frequently they did it, I don't know. Because as I said, I didn't go into the chapel or attended the rallies because of the threat that was placed on me. But the athletes uh, that did participate in the walkout of the game did continue to support the chapel fast and the occupation.
Can you talk more about any other walkouts or protests that the basketball team participated in, like at Cal State Hayward?
Okay, now the year before the the Santa Clara game, this is when I was a sophomore. Okay, and I want to make a correction because I gave the game that this activity, if you want to call it that, this protest was not with San Jose State. It was with Fresno State. So we need to make that correction. It was the very first game of the season that year in early December. But at that time, the black players on the varsity team, which was myself, my brother Roy, and Sam Hill, another gentleman named Bobby Glover, and Vincent Lombard. And we all had scholarships to play. And on the freshman team, there were two black guys on the freshman team that did not have scholarships. Now, what's interesting about this is that the white players who had scholarships were in no way in the same league as these two black ball players. No way. Maurice Harper graduated from St. Mary's High School, the class of 70. He was an all-star player in the East Bay. And Nate Carroll was an all-star player who graduated from Seaside High School, also in that year, 1970. So they were like walk-ons. That's what you would call it if you didn't have a scholarship. You tried out for the team and you made it. So here you have these very highly talented players who were not offered scholarships by St. Mary's. And for us, the black players and the BSU were like, why is this not happening for them? We were very concerned about it. Why were these white players who were no way compared to Maurice and Nate were receiving scholarships? So we organized in meetings that we had in our BSU meetings and when we talked amongst each other in our dormitory rooms and got together and said we need to take this issue to the athletic director and his staff and asked them why that Maurice and Nate were not given scholarships. And they should be, and we demanded that give them scholarships. And the athletic department, they didn't do it. And in the meetings that we had with them over at the offices that were at the, we called it the gym where we played our games, and had, I can't remember how many meetings we had with them, maybe 2 to 3, and discussed with them, very politically and requesting that they, receive scholarships and this, why not? Why were they not doing it? And they refused to do it. They wouldn't do it. So we let them know, the black players did, that if this is not done for Maurice and Nate, then we're not going to play. in the opening game of the season, which was against Fresno State. So it wasn't like the walkout at Santa Clara. It was that we, the players, did not dress up for the game or play in the game. The game went on. It was held at the gym, and St. Mary's was defeated soundly because in our group of players, the leading scorer of the team, his name was Sam Hill. He wasn't in that game, and myself and my brother and others, like I mentioned, and we, Sam Hill, myself, and my brother, we were three starters on the team. So that took a big hit on the outcome of the game. And after that, the athletic department made the decision to give those two players scholarships. So that was a victory for us of being unified and standing up for those two black players, that they were given the same treatment as the white players was with their scholarship. So that, like I said, that was in the year 71, 72. So it wasn't anything big like the walkout, but it was the beginning of us understanding that we did have power, and we exercised that power, and then we used that power later the following year of that unity.
How did you feel when you participated in either the Fresno one or the Santa Clara?
In both of them. So I'll go to the first one. Personally, for myself again, and I mentioned that in my previous interviews on how I was growing as a student and a person, and having a political consciousness that I was growing in due to the diverse classes, the ethnic classes, and what was going on in the world at large for black inclusion. Black power is the word that we used at that time. And I was evolving from a kid who had hoop dreams to come play basketball and eventually, hopefully, be drafted into the NBA, become a great NBA player, and be wealthy. Those were my dreams as being 17 years old. As a kid, college education was secondary to me at that time, not realizing that, well, what happens if I'm not going to be a professional? What am I going to do? But at that time, as a kid, I wasn't seeing that. So, okay, I'm good and I can make it. But as I continue to grow from that and being a more politically minded person, my feelings of doing all of that, I felt was a duty and a responsibility from what I had learned about black history, of what all of the sacrifices, the deaths that had occurred, and to achieve equality and freedom in this country. So all of my ancestors, especially in the South, with the marches and the protests, it was led by Dr. King during that time, and there were people who were murdered, lynchings were going on, and the fights to have the right to vote. And I felt that I was a person who inherited a struggle. And I embraced myself in that and say it was my generation, and my generation was the Black Panther Party generation, that we were going to take it a step further, not from sit-ins for integration, but to make demands on having equal access and opportunities in the business world and improvements in black communities and having power of being elected officials that could be policymakers and decision makers in government. So I felt myself growing into that. I was becoming more of a politically conscious person. So again, I felt it as it was my turn to take it to the next level with my generation. And at that time, that generation that I speak of, which was mine, we were doing that. So I was a part of that movement. So all along, all the while, from that point on, at being at St. Mary's, I grew into becoming a revolutionary and to be a person that would make statements and represent the causes that we were fighting for. That's why I volunteered to be the person to read the speech. That was the beginning of me addressing what needed to be done. I was an activist in that, in being a revolutionary. It was during that time, after the boycott in Santa Clara, I had made a decision, a personal decision for myself. I was no longer interested in going into the NBA. I knew when I made the speech and boycotted, like all the others did, that we were going to be excluded from the draft, to be penalized for that. And I was told directly by the coach of the team, who was a very powerful, influential person with the NBA. And I told his story also in last week's interview, that my chances of going professional was over with. But I didn't mind because I had made a decision. I was an entirely different person. So from that point on, I switched my major from being a history major, and I wanted to become more involved in my own personal desires. I had always been a great artist all my life, and I changed my major from history to fine arts, and I became a artist, a practicing artist. And I earned my degree in fine arts, and I had 2 minor degrees in political science and social sciences. And I took both of those degrees and used them as a profession after I graduated. And graduating from St. Mary's, and that's a story I went into detail on how I became the professional person as being a classroom teacher in Oakland for 46 years. So I started off going into the teaching profession, wanting to teach in government classes, civics classes, to be able to send that message to the students. I did my student teaching in Oakland at the high school I graduated from. Unfortunately, a position for a permanent job there was hard to get during those times. Oakland had a freeze on hiring. There was no need for teachers back then. It just flooded with teachers. But I had this great teaching credential from St. Mary's Education Department, which was so thorough that it was recognized as a lifetime credential. I didn't have to renew my credential ever. But I got a job teaching eventually after being a substitute as an art instructor at a school in Oakland. It's called Westlake Junior High School. And from that, I taught art for maybe 10 years, but Oakland cut down its art curriculum in music. But I had always had a desire to study math. And I took classes all the time. I was teaching art and was able to get what I would say a minor's or associate degree in mathematics. And I obtained a math teaching credential. And fortunately for me, I had that. because when they shut down the art curriculum, the principal hired me to teach math, and I became a math instructor for the duration of my years until I retired. So I think I taught art maybe 12 years, and then the rest of my 46 years, I was a middle school math teacher. But throughout my courses of the discipline, I always taught students the true history of this country. I always got it in. And I have former students who have come back to me and acknowledged that to me, black students, Latino students, and said, Mr. Brown, you were the first person that introduced me to black history. You were the first person that introduced me to the Mexican Revolution, who Zapata was. You were the first person who exposed me to these realities. But it was still me giving that message, even though I was doing it in a math class or doing it in an art class. One student I remember, perhaps maybe 7 or 8 years ago, he said, Mr. Brown, I learned more about black history being in your class than ever before. And I said, yeah, well, we have to know this. And again, it's like the ethnic studies, know your history, and you feel good about yourself and feel that you have a right to be here and you can make contributions as your ancestors have. So during that time, as I say, I grew into being a revolutionary, and I stayed being a revolutionary all throughout my teaching career, giving the message.
Were you ever scared that something was going to happen to you either by the mobs, or I know you talked about you knew that your basketball career that you wanted was over, or but by the FBI or just like your physical health?
Never had fear. None of us did. And it was the time, as I mentioned earlier, that we were soldiers. We saw ourselves as soldiers. And we were committed to die on the battlefield of protesting for rights and what we say, was owed to us and being incorporated within the system, which is the United States of America's government, and we belong. So we were on the battlefield. There never was any fear. No one had that. I was cautious about being arrested, but not having fear to being a spokesperson where I deemed it to be safe. I decided to become a teacher to send those messages, as I mentioned, to students, but it would be a safe environment. I wasn't going to stand out on the street corner and preach with a bullhorn and risk being shot or being involved with police arrest and being removed. And I said the way to get this message across is to take it in the classroom. And once you're in the classroom, then you can give the message. And that's exactly what I did. So I had no fear in the classroom of getting the message out. I had a lot of resistance, a lot of time from administrators that would, let me know that some of the historical things I said were not in reference to what I was teaching, the subject. And I always were able to get it in when they were not observing me. I just kept doing it anyway. But when I was being observed, I would, play it cool and not go off what I was supposed to be teaching in the class. So I had no fear in the classroom.
Were you ever confused why you were singled out by the FBI out of all the people that were participating in the protest with you?
Was I ever what?
Confused why you were singled out?
Not confused. I took it on to read that speech because I was dedicated. And I said, I'm not playing with this. And I know reading that speech, I know I was going to be the target. But again, I said I wasn't afraid. within our community, we all accepted each other and we all embraced each other. And again, in the earlier interviews, uh, I think it was yet last week, in there, when you look at that and you see that, I really painted the picture of how the black and brown community on this campus were as one. We had a place where we called our community center, which was known as the jail, spelled Gaol. That's an old Scottish term. And we had many dances organized together. We were as one. So we all bonded together and accepted each other and stood for each other, fought for each other. So there was never any feelings of being ostracized or resented by anyone. We were as one.
How did your family feel about your participation?
Okay, my parents didn't know what was going on. Uh, Myself and my brother, we never mentioned it or shared it with them. We were up here at St. Mary's. We were living in the dorms. We would go home on the weekends, but while all of this was going on, uh, we didn't mention it. But I knew my father wasn't going to go for it because he would have been afraid of repercussions because he was born in 1908 and he grew up coming from Oklahoma, Jim Crow state, and during lynching times in the 20s and 30s, he knew what white people would do to no extent and get away with it. And he would have feared that for us. And after we did the boycott, a news article was printed about it in the San Francisco Chronicle. And the title of the article, there was a snapshot of me, a mugshot. And I remember the title said, "Angry Gayle Expresses Racist Activity at St. Mary's College." I was pointed out by everybody. My face was in that newspaper. My father read the newspaper. He read the article and he saw it. And he didn't fuss at me and shout at me, but he was sad because of what could happen to me, or what could have had happened, which did. And he told me that, he said, "Son, you did the same thing I did." He was a worker at the Oakland Army base right after World War II. And the same things were going on at the job, the discrimination against the black workers. And they organized, and in the group, they had presentations they wanted to make to the bosses that they were not getting the same pay as the white workers were and not getting the overtime. And they wanted to raise that issue. My father was the person who read the issues just like I did. But I didn't know he did that. He never told me that. But he told me that then, after he read the article, because he said, "You did the same thing that I did." And he said, because of that, I was the one that got fired. Nobody else. I lost my job. But fortunately, he got another job working for the Navy after that. But he knew from his own experience that that could happen to me, and he disapproved of it.
Why do you think that your stories of resistance at SMC are not known?
When I read those that you all sent me, and I really reflected on that piece and thought about that, on why is this historic time at St. Mary's not known? And I pondered on it. I said, I don't know. Why? At the time, right after that, because it was hot, it was still something that was a murmur on campus that was always talked about, but not being on campus. And I don't think I came back up to St. Mary's but maybe one or two times after I graduated. The temperature and the climate of the students on the campus, I don't know what happened. Who were the student leaders? Was there still a BSU? Was there still Metchin? I don't know if those organizations were still on the campus. And if they were, I question why did they not keep that in the face of the student body on the campus, black, white, brown? Why wasn't that something that they pushed for to celebrate? You know, we have holidays, and seem like they could have acknowledged that with, okay, this is the chapel fast day, or this is the boycott day, and have activities based around that. I think that could have kept it going, but apparently it didn't. And over time, it just became something that seems like was forgotten. So I would, wonder for you all, when you arrived on this campus, did you know anything about that boycott and the chapel fast? Were you all exposed to that? Did you have any knowledge of that history? So if you didn't, you can imagine the students that were here before you were, that they didn't either. So at some point in time, that became something that wasn't spoken about or had faded away. But 2 years ago, one of the St. Mary's officials, he made it, I don't know how he came about it, but he recognized and he worked on it, of acknowledging the basketball walkout. And he invited the five of us players to come back up to be honored at halftime of a game that St. Mary's was playing against Gonzaga University. So we were all given gifts and thank yous and compliments in one of the rooms over there where the dining hall is, where the brothers have their gatherings and so forth. And at halftime, we were all asked to come out to the middle of the floor, and the whole auditorium gave us a standing ovation when we went out there, and the gentleman who organized that. And there was literature on that in the St. Mary's newsletter that's put out. If Michael doesn't have that, Mushir has it, and I'm sure he'll get that to Michael so you can all see that. So that was like, after 50 years, that was brought to the face of the school. And it was very honorable, and it was very highly recognized that because of that, St. Mary's changed its direction in how they would provide curriculum that would be inclusive. But from my understanding, it wasn't as strong as it was during those initial periods that it started tapering down into where it is now, which you are all a part of. But to address that question, I have no idea what happened in all of those years.
And how did them inviting you to come to the game, like how did that make you guys feel?
Well, we all contacted each other to make sure that, are you coming? Are you going to be present? And we all, agreed. And Al Strange, the gentleman who wrote the speech, he was out of state, but he came. So it was four of us that were there. And one of the players couldn't make it. He didn't show up, and he lives in Oakland, but he couldn't make it. But there were 4 out of 5 of us. And again, Mushir will send that where you all can read that. And there's a snapshot of us out there, the 4 of us out there. But we felt good about it. And my brother and Maurice Harper, one of the players, they had made statements in that article, which you all will see is a part of how we felt after all of those years of being recognized. But over the years, we never took it upon ourselves to say St. Mary should do this for us or St. Mary should recognize us for this because when we did that, we didn't do that for glory. We didn't do that to be recognized. We did that because we were soldiers and we were defending Odell Johnson and we wanted that to be known. So uh, the expectations of us receiving any glory never was there. But we talked about it when we would get together, and it would come up remembering that we did that. And one thing that was very touching to me in that was when we were out on that floor at halftime. It was like 50 years ago at halftime, we were walking out from St. Mary's athletic department. 50 years later, St. Mary's honored us. And, you know, before you go out to play, the team gets together and everybody puts their hands and say, let's go, or whatever. And we all did that in the middle of that floor. I'm getting emotional thinking about it now, on how we all felt that there we were again. And we said, go Gales. And then we walked and went on back to our seats. But it was very refreshing and rejuvenating.
That's good. Do you want to take a break for a second? Do you want to switch to it? Yeah. Or did you
Start
not?
from
Right here. Because he gave us questions. Yes, yeah, right there. Sorry. And now the next question is, why do you think your stories of resistance at St. Mary's? Oh wait, no. What do you think other generations of students could learn from your experience?
Oh yeah.
Repeat that.
So, what do you think other generations of students could learn from your experience?
You are students of another generation right here. And I'm speaking, you know, directly with you. What I hope that can be learned is that it's history of black and brown non-white students on St. Mary's College. It's history. It's recorded that this was a time where we were as one with each other. Be that again. Learn from that because there's strength in numbers. Black and brown students, diverse students, have so much in common. Learn the differences in your idiosyncrasisms of each culture, how they're so similar, because that is what I learned with being around the Chicano students. I was a good Spanish student taking Spanish courses in junior high school and high school. I knew how to conjugate verbs and write sentences, but I couldn't speak it because I never practiced. But being with the Chicano students, I learned how to speak Spanish. I would practice with them and ask, you know, how would you phrase this? And bonded strong in the Chicano community at the school. And it paid off because when I got my job at St. Westlake Junior High School, 30% of that population were Latinos. And the majority of them were Chicanos. And I was an art teacher. And a lot of those students were in a program that was called ESL, English as a Second Language. A lot of them could not speak English, but I was an art teacher. So they gave those students art classes to I always had them because it wasn't rigorous where they had to be challenged with English. But fortunately, I had learned Spanish and was very sensitive and respective to the Mexican culture. And I bonded with those students. Uh, right now, I am still in contact with one student named Raul Pelayo, who was in the seventh grade my first year. He asked me to be the godfather of his son. And Raul uh, used to come to my room. I had a portable art class, and the girl he married and has two children with, she was in my class in the afternoon, sixth period, and Raul had PE. He would sneak off from the PE area and come over to see me, which he was really coming to see Martha. And he would ask me, and all of the Chicano students, they all called me Cafe. That's how familiar it was, because Brown is my last name, and they all said I was so cool with him. They said Cafe. You know, I didn't never ask them to say Mr. Brown or anything, but I was Cafe to them. And I was very young, I was 25 years old, and still a revolutionary. I let Raul cut. I didn't say, no, man, you got to go back. Come on, man. I knew he was trying to hit on Martha, and he would leave the desk with me and go and sit over there with Martha. And they stayed together from 1976. They're married and they have two children. This is all because of my association and being with the Chicano community at St. Mary's. The Mexican community at Westlake always did a fashion show for Mother's Day, El Dia de las Madres. And they would do the fashions of the different states in Mexico. And the lady who was like, been there for ages, named Mrs. Flores, she was over that those type of activities. She asked me to MC a fashion show. So there's a whole auditorium of Latinos. And here I am on the stage being the MC. And I was doing it in Spanish. And I've lost a lot of my Spanish now. I don't practice it. But I do remember addressing the audience and told them that I was a learning Spanish speaker and that, you know, I will make errors and you can help me out. And they all gave me an applause. That feels so good. To me, I was accepted by them. But that was all due to my involvement at the school in the community of learning another culture. So if the young students on the campus would make an effort to form any type of union, to say, let's go over to the cultural center. Let's share with each other. Let's tell stories and meet each other. And that will bring a bond together, because that's what we did. So I would recommend that on the campus, that someone's could initiate that and go over to the cultural center. Scope it out. Take a look. Get ideas. And some of the paintings that exist up there were done by a great student during the time that we're talking about. His name was Matt Stelly, and his work is up there that reflects that time. So I would recommend that first, and then not to put any demands on anybody, but just get a feel for each other and see how it grows, and perhaps give an event. You know, just say, let's share foods or storytelling, poetry reading, and just have a gathering, invite the whole school to come. But take the initiative, because then you will be activists in what we did. You will be receivers of the torch and carrying it on. That would be my recommendation. And then off campus, outside of the campus, continue to study your culture and study your history. And if you feel safe when you become employed, to always keep in your heart who you are, knowing where you're from, and that you represent your peoples while you are there, and be proud of yourself for that.
Thank you so much. The next question is, what would you say to students who continue to struggle with racial injustice at St. Mary's College today?
This leads right into what I just finished saying. If you have a body to come to and share with, then that is going to help you get through it. Because the way the question stated, that racial injustices still exist. And it's manifesting more across the country. If you're keeping up with the Trump administration, is what it's doing. I mean, it's back. All of the achievements we made, they're taking those back from us. So having a support group on the campus is very vital and very crucial. Within the support group, you can organize and write, like we did, your concerns, find out who are the people that you can go to with these concerns that can address them to the president of the school or whoever it needs to get to. I don't know who the persons are that would be in a direct line with the ethnic diverse students to be a liaison to the president, but you as a group would have that foundation to take it to the person who can take it to the president. And that again, to me, is like an emotional thing beyond just having a mental mindset position on it, but one of heart and spiritually, that I would personally love to see you all do what we did in bonding together. And that way you'll feel better when you see each other. You won't be isolated as an individual because you will belong to a major or a BSU. Is there a BSU here now?
I know like the IC, they have the BSU meet there.
But there is a BSU.
I think so.
Is there a Chicano group, Mecha? Does that still exist?
It's good, none of that. No.
You do have that?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a chance for you all to coordinate with each other. And of course, there's always going to be some people who will be leaders and take the initiative and reach out and to say, hey, let's all come together in the cultural center one evening or whatever, and let's bond and let's start recognizing our history on the campus, and let's do some events in the spring that we can recognize. At least we got 2 more months to go, at least maybe get 2 or 3 things in that you can do that could send a message to the younger students that they would carry the ball for the following years.
Definitely, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's been really amazing learning more about your story, and also because it was something that I personally never knew about, and I was not told when I applied here at St. Mary's, and it was definitely something that I struggled with coming here, was not seeing such of a big diverse in the students and also in the teachers. So it's been really great learning about this, and can't wait to continue to learn more about it as well.
By all means. And for you all, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to have met you and to be able to share with you. I really have a good, warm feeling inside, and it reminds me of being back at St. Mary's. So it was good. And I really love learning from the Chicanos. I really learned from them. So it was a wonderful experience, and you all could share that with each other.
I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
so
Okay.
much.
Appreciate it.
All right.
I think we just have to call him back in,
Okay.
just to turn it off.
Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead on and get back into Oakland and continue today. And Mushir and I will be doing these interviews. I think there's 3 or 4 more.
Mhm.
But we will be